In this video, we're going to discuss how to install nozzles on fences or walls and on the eaves of a house. We'll primarily cover nozzle placement and installation technique, but we'll also pass on a few tips we've gathered from our dealers. Let's start with fences and walls. Fences in general present an ideal surface for installing nozzles since they typically define the perimeter of protection we're constructing. They offer lots of flexibility with respect to nozzle height, and it is usually pretty easy and quick to make a clean, relatively hidden installation. Remember, wind passing over a fence top creates a low pressure zone that will suck the mist out of the perimeter and off property. So in general, you should try to install nozzles at least a couple of feet from the top of a fence so the mist is contained in the property. Let's start with a discussion of how to install nozzles on a wooden fence. Generally, your options with respect to installation technique will be determined by the configuration of the fence, whether the picket side faces the inside of the property or the rail side of the fence does, and whether the fence has a cap on top. If the rail side of the fence faces the inside of the property, you can install the nozzle circuit on the bottom side of the horizontal rails, on either the top or bottom rail, like so. First, mark the nozzle positions on the fence with a piece of painter's tape. Then stretch the tubing taut but not tight along the rail, as we discussed in the Universal Truths video, using 1/4-inch clamps or staples on the tubing, or 3/8-inch clamps around the nozzle fittings. Securing the tubing every couple of feet will yield a clean, no sag look. If you use staples, there are a few things to note. 1, it's easy to accidentally puncture the tubing, so practice first. 2, the staples can work their way out, so one of our dealers emphasized putting in 2 staples very close together. Finally, remember staples will likely need to be replaced over time as they corrode, so you'll need to be aware of that as you service the systems. This type of installation will require you to drill through fence posts with a long drill bit. Make sure and drill close to the pickets to avoid kinking the tubing run. And remember, no matter what the installation surface is, make sure and plug the tubing with either painter's tape or a union and plug to keep it clear of dirt, dust, or shavings that will foul the nozzles when you start up the system. If the fence has a cap, you can install the tubing on the bottom edge of the cap. However, this probably positions the nozzles too near the top of the fence, and you'll risk a lot of the mist drifting off property. A good alternative is to run the tubing along the bottom edge of the cap and then extend the nozzles down the fence with copper risers, which offers a very finished look. You can secure the risers to the fence with clamps. When the pickets are facing the customer's property, you have 2 options. If you have access to the other side, the rail side of the fence, you can create a very clean finished look by installing the tubing on the rail side of the fence and then mounting the nozzles in holes drilled through the pickets misting into the customer's property. As you decide to do this, make sure and consider how you'll service this part of the nozzle circuit over time. Will you have access to the tubing if a squirrel chews a hole in it? It might be on a neighbor's property. Will you be able to easily change a clogged nozzle tip? Make sure there is enough clearance to be able to change the nozzle tip and drill the hole larger than the fitting so that the fence can't open up the fitting. Now let's move on to wrought iron fences, which are probably the easiest surface on which to install a nozzle run. Use black UV-rated zip ties, as we discussed in the Tools and Consumables video, to secure the tubing to the fence. Install a nozzle every 10 feet and secure the fitting to the fence by wrapping a zip tie around the fitting. Place zip ties about every 2 feet between nozzles to prevent sagging in the line. And be sure to trim off excess in the zip ties. Now let's move on to a discussion about installing on brick or stone walls. Brick and stone walls can present issues. They can be very time-consuming to make an installation, and depending on how they're built, it can be tough to hide the nozzle circuit and make the installation look clean. But in some places, they are the dominant perimeter feature and might be the only surface available for the nozzle circuit. One good alternative, as we've just discussed with wood fences, is to install a run of risers at the base of the wall. Should you decide to install the nozzle circuit on the wall, your options are to either install it on top or on the wall facing the customer's property. Either way, you will need to drill a hole into the wall for each nozzle and securing point between nozzles. You will need a masonry bit, concrete anchors, and 1/4-inch nylon clamps. After drilling the hole, you can use a concrete anchor through the nylon clamp to secure the tubing as you would on a wood fence. Now let's talk about installing a nozzle run on the eaves of a house. Eaves can also offer a handy installation surface. Because of their relative height above the ground, mist from nozzles installed on eaves can effectively drift throughout the property. Eave nozzles are relatively easy to install, and they can generally be hidden pretty well behind the soffit. And of course, the tubing is available in colors that blend or can be painted to match. Having said that, you should consider a few things before installing a run of eave nozzles. Try to avoid installing nozzles too high because the mist will be blown off target much of the time and because they are difficult and time-consuming to service. There is a potential for discoloration on the surrounding fascia and soffit from the insecticide. Usually the discoloration is caused by dirt or dust sticking to the surface that has been wetted by the mist and can be cleaned. To install eave nozzles, mark the nozzle positions, generally every 10 feet, with painter's tape. The tubing should be placed just behind the fascia board where it meets the soffit. Attach the tubing to the soffit using dyna clamps or staples positioned every couple of feet between nozzles. When you're ready to locate a nozzle, cut the tubing and secure the nozzle to the fascia board. You can either use 1/4-inch clamps or staples to secure the tubing on either side of the T. Or you can use a 3/8-inch clamp on the fitting itself. Remember, taut but not tight. When you come to a corner, you need to avoid installing a kink in the line. In the case of an outside corner, you'll need to use a 90-degree union elbow to make the turn. In an inside corner, you can usually allow the tubing to form a gradual turn. If you're going to terminate a run on an eave, use a 90 union elbow as the terminal fitting. To access the eaves from the ground level, you can install the tubing next to the cable and phone utilities. Alternatively, you can install the tubing on the back side of the gutter downspout with UV-rated zip ties. That's all for this video. In the next one, we're going to tackle installation on risers and trees.